We are live.
All right, good evening, everyone. This meeting is called to order in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Notice of this meeting was sent to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Highland Park Planet on March 15th, 2021, and was posted on the Borough website at www.hpboro.com and on the bulletin board of the Borough Hall, 221 South Fifth Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey, on March 15th, 2021, and has remained continuously posted as required by law. As mayor, I preside over this meeting and may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement or participation in the virtual meeting if the participant's statement does not adhere to the 3 minutes provided for each participant for public comment, or if the statement is abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. Borough Deputy Clerk, roll call, please.
Mayor Burl-Mittler,
Here.
Councilwoman Canavera,
Here.
Councilwoman Foster, Councilman George,
Here.
Councilman Hale,
Here.
Councilmember Hirsch,
Here.
Councilwoman Kim Chohan,
Here.
Special Counsel Bauman,
Here.
Planner Jim Constantine,
Here.
Planner Chris Consenza,
Here.
and Borough Administrator Hover.
Here.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 26th, 2021 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Canavera,
Yes.
Councilman George,
Yes.
Councilman Hale,
Yes.
Councilmember Hirsch,
Yes.
Councilwoman Kim Chohan.
Yes.
Okay. So before we get on to the agenda item for tonight, the draft of our downtown redevelopment plan presentation, I would just like to say a few words. Tonight, we're taking the next step in protecting the future of Highland Park for our children and our grandchildren. Since 2003, we have been talking about developing our downtown. It is so critical that we move in this direction. High taxes in Highland Park are forcing residents, many of them seniors, to move out of town because they can't afford the real estate taxes they have to pay on their houses. Downtown development will help stabilize our taxes. Highland Park is such an interesting town, and what we need to do with this redevelopment plan is showcase all of our advantages. And I want to thank our planners and Councilman Matt Hale and our Borough Administrator / Redevelopment Director Terry Hover for all the work they have put into this. This is a very exciting plan. All of the surrounding towns, New Brunswick, Metuchen, just for instance, have moved forward. Now it is our time to save our community and move forward, but move forward in our way, with a downtown that reflects our values, our diversity, our belief in public art, and our future. At this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Councilman Hale, who is our Economic Development Committee Liaison and Head. So Matt, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate it. I'll be brief. As you said, tonight is really about a presentation from our professionals. And I really do want to start off by thanking very much Jim Constantine, Chris Cosenza, Joe Bauman, and of course, Terry Hover for their tireless work on putting this together. It is not an easy thing to do, to take the opinions of council members, the opinions of the public, the opinions of what's legal and putting it all together in a single document. So I really do appreciate how hard all of our professionals have worked to incorporate all of the ideas that we've received so far into this document. So I'm gonna I just want to real quickly sort of go over that tonight we're going to primarily hear a presentation about the redevelopment plan. After that, we are going to refer this to the planning board, and the planning board will have their options for review. Terry's going to go over all of the various options for public input that will happen over the next couple months in pretty good detail. So, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that our job tonight is to refer this, to review this, to refer this to the planning board for their detailed master plan review. I hope that the public and I hope that the watchers of this are going to recognize many of the changes that have been made as a result of public comment and public input. And I think that's a really important process that we will continue. So you will see in this document that we've designed it as flexible as we possibly can. There is a centralized parking concept that we will explore, but there are options for non-centralized parking in here. There is 4 separate tracks that can move ahead independently of each other. There is discussion in here of ways of creating a public space that we've heard about and has been a priority. So the input that we've received from the public, I think, is incorporated into this document in many ways. I will not promise that everything that everyone has asked for is in this document, but I will say that we have done our level best to try and put forth a document that represents many of the things that we've been hearing in so far. I also want to point out that through this process, the redevelopment process, and Joe is going to talk about this in some more detail as well. Through this process, this is the way that Highland Park gets the development that we want. Having a redevelopment plan and a redevelopment agreement is the way that we get to have as much control over this process as we want as a community. That coupled with the fact that for the first time in Highland Park, we are owners of some of the redevelopment property, that will certainly help our ability to shape and direct where we are going with this. And so I think that's an important thing for us to recognize and to think about, that this is a plan that makes sure that the interests of the community are front and center. And I think that's a really important thing, because this is so central to what we're doing. This is such an important thing for Highland Park. We need this redevelopment. We need to bring more people to downtown. Tonight, you're going to see a picture frame. You're going to see a picture frame of that we've spent with the community several months sort of developing a picture frame. We're still painting the picture, and it's still going to take a while before that picture is done. But tonight, you're going to hear about the frame of it. You're going to hear some specifics about what's possible and what's available. And we're still painting the picture. We're still hoping that the public is going to be a part of that process, and there's still going to be many opportunities for the public to be a part of that process. So I'm excited about this. I think that this is a great opportunity for Highland Park. It's a great opportunity for us to really sort of turn a corner as a community, and I hope we can all be a part of it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry, who is going to talk a little bit about some logistics and specifics, and then we'll move into Jim and Joe and Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And I too will keep my comments brief, because I know we are kind of obstacles to the center stage, which would be our professionals and opportunity for additional public comment. But briefly, I'm going to just share my screen, because I have gotten a number of emails and questions regarding the process moving forward. And so you're going to probably hear this stated more than one time, but I did put together a slide that will help me stay on track in part, but also I will share, and we will also share this on our website too. But one thing I wanted to make clear was that this is our current plan. However, things can happen between now when it goes to the planning board and comes back with comments that could mean the schedule shifts again. I mean, that's what's happened. We had a different timeline. I think a very similar slide was presented last year, and based on comments and time needed to kind of work through some of the mechanics of the plan, we took longer. I put this forward as this is our current operating plan, but it could shift. And if it shifts, it's not going to be earlier, it'll be later. I just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody because there has been a concern. And I just want to ask if everybody can see my screen. I'm assuming that's the case. Okay. So with that, we're all here tonight, April 13th at 7 p.m. And as Councilman Hale mentioned, there is a resolution on the agenda for later to refer the draft plan to the planning board, which is our game plan. But again, council has to make that vote to make that happen. And again, there's opportunity for comment this evening, as well as, I should say, kind of skipping to the end, we have been receiving comments via email. People send them to me. My email address is up here, tjover@hpboro.com. And I do share those with our team, including the mayor and the council as they come in. So please continue to do that as you want to give feedback. That's very helpful. So just know that that's available any day of the week. But tonight we're here with a resolution for consideration to refer this draft over to the planning board for their review for consistency with the master plan. And it's also opportunity for the planning board to give comment on the plan as well. The 14th, tomorrow, that plan will go to the planning board members, and it will also be posted on our website at hpboro.com. And we also will make a hard copy available for anybody who would prefer to come and read a hard copy. You just got to make an appointment with our clerk, Jen Santiago, and we will make that available to you. We have a COVID safe way to do so. So all those methods will be available. And then it'll be on an agenda, the upcoming planning board meeting, which will be on May 13th, where that will be the opportunity for the planning board to discuss the plan and whether or not it is consistent with the master plan. And it's also their opportunity to give other comments as they see fit to the council prior to introduction. So and at that meeting, though it's an open public meeting, it'll be on Zoom, as all of our meetings have been due to the pandemic. The public may give comment at that point as well. So that's another opportunity, to Councilman Hale's point, for anybody who is interested in listening to hear this, hear their conversation and give comment. Where we're tracking toward a June 1st introduction. However, we need to see what the planning board's comments are, and we need to see if it's consistent with the master plan. And depending on what we get back, there may be adjustments needed to the plan. If they're easy ones, we can go ahead and introduce on June 1st. And then there'll be opportunity for public comment. Excuse me one second. Sorry, my phone was ringing. It was distracting me. I apologize. Then on June 15th, it would be scheduled for a public hearing. And I should back up 1 second, just indicate that the plan gets adopted via an ordinance, which takes 2 meetings. So the introduction happens, and then there's a public hearing, and then it can be scheduled for a vote at that second meeting. And so again, there's during the public hearing opportunity for public comment prior to a vote. And again, there would be also our usual public comments as embedded in a typical mayor and council meeting. So there's opportunities throughout both of those meetings. So I guess I just wanted to put this out there because I know the process. This has been, we started this last year and we had this process, and I just wanted to make sure everybody, this is our best kind of understanding of how this will move forward at this point. And as I mentioned before, if we get significant enough comments between now and the 1st, we may reevaluate the timeline, just as we've done all along. And we'll keep you posted as we do. Again, please feel free to contact me with comments that you want me to hear or questions, or comments you would like to share with the governing body. And you can also reach them. Their contact information is on our website if you want to reach them directly. So that's the only thing I wanted to share slide wise. And I'm going to step aside and actually let Joe Bauman, our special counsel for redevelopment, correct me if I said anything incorrect on that last slide, and then kind of tee up some of kind of what the distinction between a plan, a redevelopment plan, and how this process works, and some key points that everybody needs to keep in mind, plan versus typical zoning. And then we'll turn it over to Jim Constantine, who will walk us through an overview of the draft plan. And like I said, this draft that is being referred to tonight and will be referred to the planning board if the council moves forward with that, will be made available on the borough's website, so you can read every word and have and reflect and give comment on the actual draft. So with that, Joe, would you add anything to my explanation of the process? And
No, that's great. The only thing that struck me as you spoke is we may have a meeting between today and June where just a general meeting that's not being taking action, where you have public comment generally. I don't know if that's true. Is there a meeting?
It's whether or not we would have another redevelopment meeting. There might be one in between there, but we haven't. It's on the calendar. I just didn't want to put it here and then have everybody. Where's the meeting? But we could certainly. We always have the discretion to add a meeting if the mayor feels it's advisable, and if we think we need to do so, we will.
So. I think let me start by saying I've been doing this for 25 plus years. There's a couple things that are striking to me about this process. I can't recollect a more inclusive, robust public participation process than what is being undertaken in Highland Park. We're 9 months into this or something in this process, beginning with the various presentations to the groups, the pictures, the explanations, the meetings. So you guys are clearly one of the most inclusive community participant, encouraging community participant that I've seen. So that's pretty striking about this process. The other thing I think that's striking about this process is this is a really well-crafted, robust 80-page redevelopment plan. So when I say 80 page, that may sound intimidating a little bit to those that are going to be reviewing it, although you'll have a month. But it does speak to how careful and thoughtful Jim was with the mayor's input and the council's input in terms of trying to craft a redevelopment plan that addresses multiple areas, contemplates individual projects or more than one happening at different times, creates enough flexibility in it that the marketplace can respond creatively and give us some sort of choices about what might happen there. But at the same time, as Councilman Hale describes, sets the frame within which they can paint their picture and give us thoughts about how the picture can look. So this has been an incredible process. And then even most recently, when we decided what's the best way to roll out the plan, how do we roll this out to the public? Well, we could tonight introduce the ordinance with the plan. That's one of the procedures. That may be the most common one, frankly, where you introduce the ordinance, you also adopt the resolution, you send it to the planning board at the same time. That process sort of assumes that the planning board's comments will be not significant enough that you can then immediately adopt the plan. But the mayor and the council concluded that they didn't want to presume that the comments would be so easily incorporated that we wouldn't have to introduce a new ordinance. So instead, we took probably the road slightly less traveled, which is we are sending this plan to the planning board before we introduce the ordinance. And then we'll look to get the comments back from the planning board, and then we'll introduce our ordinance. So we've added this additional step, which is contemplated under the statute, but again, not as common, I would say, as the introduce the ordinance on the same night you send it to the planning board. And we've done that to give the public plenty of time to respond to the plan. I mean, there'll be people that will suggest that we shouldn't even refer to the planning board tonight, but frankly, I would see, that would make no sense to me. We need to get it to the planning board, give them time to think about it while the public's thinking about it. A month is a very generous amount of time for everyone to get, review it, and then it will come back to us. And again, as described, we'll have multiple more public, more hearings. And if it's, as Terry describes, if we get to the point where we think there's been significant changes, maybe the ordinance doesn't get introduced right away. So every step of the way has been an effort to try and engage the public, get comments. And I think, as Councilman Hale described, we certainly have not incorporated everyone's comments. That's not the way this probably is supposed to go, because then it ends up looking, I describe it more like a camel than a horse, because it's just a committee of a bunch of ideas. So there's a vision here that's articulated in this plan. It's shown in pictures, it's shown in text, and then it's shown in section 5, which is where I will direct everyone's attention, which is the bulk standards. That's the real meat of this redevelopment plan as you're going through it. That's where you know, to the extent you have limited pages you can look at, spend your time looking at section 5. So that's what's going to be presented by Jim and Chris today. The other thing that Terry alluded to that's really important to focus on is section 7 of the plan. And the section 7 of the plan, I think it's page 80, lays out the process by which once the plan will be adopted, we take ourselves to the next step. And this is what stands out in redevelopment versus municipal land use law, because that section requires a redevelopment agreement, a contract between us and the developer for each parcel that's being developed, which allows us to get in much greater detail in terms of commencement date, completion date, details about design standards, so much more detail that is not in the plan. That's not available to you under the municipal land use law. That is available to us under the law. So that will be yet another step, another way for us to take the picture frame and begin to fill out the picture itself. And in the end, that picture will be result in this redevelopment agreement. That's the picture that we're going to paint, which will then another step. Then that project will still go through the standard municipal land use process, which is to the planning board for their input. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. We've done a lot already in terms of community input. Now we're really starting getting into the legislative process, and there'll be a lot of opportunities, as Terry described, for input. But again, as the public is reviewing this plan, you know, certainly take a look at the history, which, by the way, for me was also sort of interesting to reflect upon. We last did this in 2005. So 16 years have passed since Highland Park attempted a redevelopment plan to try and jumpstart redevelopment. And that plan didn't really produce significant development over 16 years, which included a pretty significant growth period in the economy in development. And so with that in mind, that was also part of what informed Jim and informed us and the council in terms of crafting this new plan, is we didn't want to have another 2005 plan that sat 16 years and nothing ever happened. So we're informed through this process to try and craft a plan that will achieve our goals, but also will be enticing to the development community, and taking control of some of the land ourselves is part of that process. Will be enticing to the development community, so we can actually make the now 2021 plan much more effective than perhaps our 2005 plan 16 years ago. So those things have informed us the process. It's a balancing act. You want to put together a plan that captures the vision of the community, but we also wanted to invite the vision of the development community, because their vision, their creativity within our picture frame is going to be what's going to make this, each one of these projects individually or collectively, projects that we could be proud of. So I think that's sort of what I want to add. And then Jim is going to really walk us through. Some of this is going to seem incredibly familiar to the public because it's what we've been talking about for some time. Some of it is changed because we heard some of the comments, and some of it frankly didn't change because after hearing the comments, we concluded that it was still, we still thought it was the best way to go. And that's sort of how this process ends up all the time. No member of the public is always going to get whatever they want. Frankly, no member of the governing body generally gets everything they want. And you end up with hopefully a vision and a plan and a frame that is going to produce competition among the development community to do projects that we can all be proud of. Thanks.
All right, Jim, you ready?
Sure, let me share screen here. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening. I'm going to try to summarize and really stay high level. There's a lot of detail, as Joe mentioned, in this plan, and I don't think it's fair to dive into that until folks, including the public, have a chance to review that. So we'll probably get into a more granular discussion at the planning board in May on the plan. But just quickly, in terms of orientation, this is a map that folks have seen before. We're calling this the Downtown Redevelopment Plan for tracks A through D. There's 4 tracks involved, which you see shown here along Raritan Avenue. From, you can see my cursor on the left, we have track A, which is the Gateway redevelopment area. Track B is 130-134 Raritan, that sits between the Mersey Venezuelan restaurant and the former Sunoco. Track C is the borough-owned property at this location. And then track D is a combination of the North 3rd Avenue right-of-way and properties that flank it, and is the largest site and the one that we've also looked at as an opportunity for a centralized parking facility. The purpose of this redevelopment plan, quite simply, building on the remarks you've heard the mayor, Matt, and Joe Bauman state, is to take a more focused approach and to try to jumpstart the borough's long-held goal of having redevelopment that helps revitalize and add value to the downtown. And having a thriving downtown is, you know, the top goal in the master plan. And so this effort also builds upon the master plan. Advance with this. Here we go. So a couple of things that we learned in the master plan process, which had hundreds and hundreds of people participate. Almost 600 people took an online survey. A couple hundred people showed up at our community workshops. And we asked people in the online survey, should downtown remain the same, or, and then we had a whole host of potential changes. So one of the most important statistics that came out of that survey is that only 9% of the community said downtown should remain the same. 9 out of 10 folks were choosing things and indicating, and so some of the elements that are in this plan that come right out of that community participation is the creation of a town square public space. Hugely popular, community endorsed feature, and that's part of this plan. The community also indicated, when we asked them to comment on downtown, they asked us to address vacant properties, empty storefronts, a high turnover of businesses that make the streetscape unpleasant and present a sense of neglect. Those are citizens' words from the master plan effort. And they particularly said that this area from South First up through South Second, where we have both track A on the left, track B on the right, was one of the areas that needed that special attention. So I'd like to first go to track A and B, then go to C, and end up on D as we move our way up the avenue. Track A is on the left, the Gateway site. It flanks, it includes Rutgers Gun and Boat, Classic Cleaners, the vacant parking lots there, all the way down to Bergen Auto, which is owned by the borough. And the vision here, and we use these visualizations that represent the bulk standards and all the criteria that's contained in here, is to create a gateway that enhances the sense of arrival coming into the downtown. Another goal of the master plan. And in this view here, you do see that there's some selective additional height along the terracing back so that the height isn't all the way at the street, to try to achieve some additional density to incentivize redevelopment to happen. What can occur within these buildings? Well, it's potential for mixed use development with urban loft style housing above, including affordable housing. And then on the ground floor, the real trick is to try to limit how much additional retail space we create, but that meant also expanding the uses on the ground floor. Another goal that comes out of the master plan. So that could include remote working space, fitness centers, business incubators, creative maker space, perhaps alternate uses that we haven't seen, like a boutique hotel that could fit into these blocks and into the scale of development. We haven't changed the zoning to allow taller height everywhere. It's selective height in these locations. Another critical aspect about bringing people living right on the avenue is it expands the downtown customer base, and that means that we'll get more of those demographic segments that want to live, work, shop, ride, and use transit in the downtown. Track B, which is located here where you see the trees behind the restaurant, again, mirrors and sort of completes that bookend set of gateways, gateway effect coming into the downtown. And everything I just said pertaining to Track A also pertains to Track B. You can see the terracing back at the upper level. A couple of the changes that we did make in response to community input is that there would be no parking coming through a neighborhood accessing the rear of the site at Track B. However, we also opened up the ability for potential parking on the left side view there on Track A, on the gateway site, where there is a change of grade down to Denison Street, and we are allowing, and developers will see what the market assesses, the potential for parking at the ground level on those buildings. In addition, in response to community input, because there were some concerns, if everybody's living here and they're parking 2 blocks away, what about servicing, getting groceries to their home, picking up someone? We have added into the plan the ability to have some limited on-site parking, which can also include a reserved space on Raritan Avenue, which would be available there to accommodate daily needs of residents at these locations. So again, a lot of changes that we put into the plan in response to what we heard from the community. So I've talked about the bottom here, Tracks A and B, and I'm going to move up the avenue just to the next block beyond South 2nd. This site here, which is Track C, the borough currently owns this site, and the design concept here was to really create a focal point that terminates the vista. There's a slight bend in the road at this location. If I go back maybe to the map there, where you actually see this from a much further distance up and down the avenue at that bend. The building, again, terraces back from the street. It would frame a small public plaza at the street that would lead to an interior mid-block courtyard that would connect all the way back to Magnolia Street. We heard some community feedback, and we've incorporated into the standards trying to protect the privacy and a little greater setback where we're adjacent to some of the existing neighbors that back up to the site at this location, and some of the potential for convenience parking, both potentially on street, but also we know in some combination with the shared parking that the church uses as well at this location is also permitted in the plan and has been sort of opened up in response to some of the community feedback that we've heard. And I'm going to move further up the street to the top of the page here to Track D at the corner of 3rd Avenue. This location envisions creating a public space, a public plaza, combined with a landmark building as well as a centralized parking facility, which you see visualized here with a farmer's market depicted in this rendering, a landmark building that anchors the corner on the left. It tries to really help create this sense of this is an important corner because of the public space that's there at that location. Behind the farmer's market banner, you see the parking structure. There's very few spaces, properties or assemblages of properties downtown that can accommodate the dimensions that are required to have cost-effective structured parking. This was one, and so we're showing that here behind Provident Bank. You can see another new building to the right of that as well. This is a reverse view from Denison Street, the corner looking south up North 3rd Avenue, where that parking lot is today that we talked about as a potential centralized parking facility. The parking facility, though, would not be exposed as this existing parking lot that's been here for basically forever to the neighborhood. It would be shielded and screened by a liner building that you see there at the corner in brick that tries to reflect and mimic a little bit of what's at the opposite corner with the office building. And that shields the garage from direct view from the neighborhood. The garage would also have a liner space on the ground floor where it would front onto the North 3rd Avenue. Can have banners, be enlivened. There's lots of creative opportunities. That ground floor liner space in the garage has potential for arts programming, both for performances and exhibits. Some other communities have done that with their garages. And at this location, we'll talk in a moment about the potential to also, maybe I'll just mention that now, also in combination with this and the whole idea of parking at a centralized location, we need to improve the first mile, last mile connectivity to New Brunswick, to Rutgers, to the train station across the river. So that just not only means pedestrian bicycle improvements, but also looking at jitney rideshare bus servicing so that there allows for folks to live in sort of a less automobile reliant way. This site also includes scale down, and I talked before about on the avenue where we're allowing some selective additional height and density. We've actually scaled that down to hold and match Denison Street in the neighborhood. So where the parking lot is exposed down here at the corner, the idea is that a liner building would shield structured parking, but be done in a way that's reflective of the neighborhood character, sort of mirrors what's up and down Denison Street with smaller scale frame buildings, projections and recesses, porches, verandas that really help to make it fit in. And here's again, back to the map, the 4 tracks, track A, the Gateway track, track B, 130, 134 Raritan, track C, the Borough property, and then the assemblage up here, including both the North 3rd Avenue right-of-way and the properties in track D, and there's outlined in yellow where that multi-level structured parking facility could be located, and 1,000 feet puts us, that's less than a 5-minute walk all the way down to the edge of the Gateway properties. We've also included in the plan, again, based on some community feedback from the months of process, that if a centralized parking structure is not built on track D, that the borough will have the flexibility to adjust the density development programming on one or more of these tracks. We might find an alternate location, or we may have redevelopment that doesn't involve a multi-level parking structure. And then lastly, in closing, we've used the master plan as a guide to really help implement, or really this redevelopment plan is using the master plan as a guide to implement the master plan concepts. I think it's also important to note that master plan was finished in December of 2019. We were not able to foresee what we were going to face in 2020 with a global pandemic. And we're now facing the reality of that, which is things have changed quite dramatically for most communities. And there's challenges with that. New Jersey has seen obviously incredible demand as folks are choosing to live here, and that's affecting housing demand and values. But we also have a trend that really hit me in an article a month ago in the Wall Street Journal. Richard Florida used to teach at Rutgers. He was one of the co-authors of this. And the big takeaway here was that this remote work is here to change, is here to stay. It's changing the geography of communities, but it's particularly creating opportunities for smaller ones. Now that the workforce can work remote, smaller communities are seeing, in fact, workers choose to live there, but they're looking for complete live-work communities. What they talked about in here, the 15-minute neighborhood where you have all the necessities of life and work, play, and education within a short walk or ride from home. Because if you're working from home, your community matters more. And there are small communities around the nation that are even offering grants to people to relocate there. And the number one reason that workers are choosing in their relocation strategy is finding an affordable place to live. So I think Highland Park is actually fortunately well positioned, and this master plan allows us to explore some ways to take advantage of the challenges that we face. So with that, I am going to turn or maybe Terry, can you?
Do you need me to eject you?
Yes, I don't see the shared
Hold on.
screen. Sorry.
Hold on a moment.
Oh, here it is. It just
You
snuck
found
away
it?
from
Oh, good. Because now for some reason oh, here we go. You want me to stop you?
Yes, why don't you? It's not coming back.
I am
Thank you.
stopping participants sharing. All right. Gail, you're muted.
One of the things that would be helpful if Joe, I think you'd be the person to expand upon is actually how the parking deck would be funded.
So, yeah, that is sort of a to be determined thing, but the various opportunities for funding include the proceeds from the sale of some of our property to redevelopers. That's one option. To the extent that we, as we've considered in these projects and in our negotiations, financial cash contributions from the redevelopers to the redevelopment process, so they write us a check. There's the opportunity for commitments, long-term commitments to use the parking garage, which is a guaranteed revenue stream that could be securitized. There are payments in lieu of taxes that could be negotiated, that could be dedicated to the garage. You know, there's some infrastructure money that's coming down the pike. We're tracking the federal infrastructure bills. There's clearly going to be a lot of money made available to state and local entities, including in the transportation area. There may be grants in there as well. So we have a bond ordinance that we could perhaps use some of it. So there's a lot of different opportunities to fund that garage, and you know, well, go ahead,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe. Finish that.
The only thing else is, you know, again, the cash contributions, to the extent that we're going to allow density in some of these locations, we're going to look for a community benefit. The community benefit could be a cash contribution to the garage.
Yeah, that's just, I was going to add that part of the framework for developing a centralized parking area is that we would do all we can to make sure that the new apartment buildings are the ones that are contributing to that in a significant way so that the town is not sort of on the hook for the entire thing, that it's that we expect those contributions to come from the developers in a large way.
Thank you. Okay, anybody on council have any questions for our professionals or for Terry or Matt? Okay. Well, in that case, may I have a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-01, the resolution of the Municipal Council of the Borough of Highland Park and the County of Middlesex, New Jersey, referring to the Downtown Redevelopment Plan for tracks A through D to the Borough of Highland Park's Planning Board.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Terry, you raising your hand?
Yeah, I believe we had one, it was more of a correction on a block and lot on page 2. Jen, do you have the
Yeah.
corrected numbers so that we could read that into the record and it'll be reflected in the final resolution that she produces. But we caught it. It was correct on page 1. It was incorrect on page 2. So we wanted to make sure the record was clear.
So then,
It should read Block 22, Lots 4, 32.02, and 3301.
okay. And may I have a motion to move this to the planning board with, as amended with corrected block and lots?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Canavera?
Yes.
Councilman George?
Yes.
Councilman Hale?
Yes.
Councilmember Hirsch?
Yes.
Councilwoman Kim Cho-Han?
Yes.
Okay. We're about to enter our public comment session. Each speaker has 3 minutes, but may comment on any topic. The borough clerk will monitor the time and will offer a 10-second warning and then indicate when 3 minutes has lapsed. The session will wrap up by 9 p.m. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone keypad or select the raise hand button in the application. The borough administrator will announce your turn by reading out your name or the last 4 digits of your phone number. Please begin by telling us your first and last name as well as your address. Again, if you would like to speak about this agenda item, please press *9 or the raise hand button now. And then Borough Administrator, would you please announce the first?
Yes, and I'll just, so the public is aware, we have at this moment 77 attendees, and I see approximately 8 hands raised at this point. First up is Peter Spool. Peter, could you please state your name and address for the record?
I'm Peter Spool. I'm at 146 Graham Street, corner of South 2nd Avenue in Highland Park. So I wish, Mr. Constantine, that you had told us which parts of the plan were the changes, because from the photos and the pictures, it's not clear to me what changed. Also, it would have been nice to see, since you talked about an alternative that didn't include the parking deck, what that track would be used for instead, and where there would be on-site parking in the other tracks. I didn't see any changes involving those. That would be something I would think should be included for completeness. Can you elaborate on that, please? Maybe the paper copy of the plan now includes those things? Would have been nice to present them tonight too.
Terry, do you?
I just want to say, yes, I just wanted to reiterate, I guess I had intended to do that after Jim concluded and I forgot that the document will be made available on the website. Some people did join a little later, so they may have missed my overview tomorrow. And it's being referred to the planning board tomorrow. Jim had a tough task here because there's like Joe mentioned earlier, the bulk standards, the detail is a lot. And he tried to highlight where we've made some changes, but we didn't draw pictures of all the alternatives that are built into the plan. But I do think reading the plan will hopefully illuminate some of that for you.
So the drawings haven't been changed in the plan to indicate those other possibilities?
So let me just jump in, Terry. So there is a unlimited number of possibilities. We actually debated whether or not to put illustrations at all because of this exact conversation, which is people will say, well, why is that illustration in there but not another illustration? Because there is, within the confines of the bulk standards in section 5, as imaginative as you could be, there's that many different pictures we could draw. So we do have the pictures from the original, but there's the bulk standards. And to your question about articulating the differences are based upon the conversations we've been having amongst the public and the governing body. There was never a written document, so it would be impossible for Jim to show you a black line, for example, showing the old plan to the new plan. There is no old plan. This is the plan that's been developed through dialogue. So it's not
Since-
possible to articulate for you how it's changed, other than when you read the plan, you'll see, oh, I remember them talking about that, and now it looks like this. And so that's-
Perhaps most documents that are produced like this, they even use change bars to show what's different. That's
Yeah, but-
really helpful for people who gave their input and wanted to see what the impact is.
But what
I'm
I'm saying-
disappointed.
But you're misunderstanding me. I apologize. There was no document to draw change bars next to. This is the first plan that's been written. Before this, it was all dialogue and pictures. Now there's an 80-page document of text. So there would be nothing to compare it to for you to see what the old document is. There was no old document. This is the first textual document plan.
I see.
Yeah.
I hope that'll be helpful. I wish this had been released before the meeting so people would have a chance to look at it. It might have avoided some questions that you may get.
See, the issue is there's always going to be a first time when we release it. And every time we release it for the first time, people will always say to us, why didn't you release it before that? But there has to be a first time that we release it. That's today, right? So yes, it's always better that we could have done the first time sooner, but there will be a first time when we reveal it. That's today. And we've given everybody the month to review it. So, you know, there just has to be a moment where we reviewed for the first time, and that's today. And now you have a month to respond to it. So I don't think that if we'd done it 2 weeks earlier, it still would have been the first time we revealed it to you. And so that's sort of the situation we're in. So there's a month for people to read it and respond to it and attend the planning board and then our meetings as well.
And I just want to add that this is not a development plan. That the buildings that you see there are not the buildings that will necessarily appear. This is, again, the frame of a plan that will allow the development community to react within the bulk standards, within the framework of this, with their creative ideas. And then we will have the opportunity as a community to review those plans and approve or not approve those plans. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that's where we are in this process. This is not a development plan that we're talking about tonight. This is a proposal about the frame of development plans. So I just want to make sure that's clear too.
Thank you for that, Matt. Okay, Terry, do we have another hand raised?
We do. Next on the list is Dan Stern Cardinal. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name is Dan Stern Cardinal. I live on Harper Street. And I just want to say that I think this framework looks really good. I really like the approach we're taking. I think it's really appropriate for that downtown corridor. One major thing I just want to make sure everybody hears is that density, which is often kind of a scare word, is an affirmative good. There's a lot of research on this, that denser communities are more walkable, they are more sustainable, both ecologically and economically. They are healthier because you have less of a dependence on cars. Specifically, and obviously really important, because you have less of a dependence on cars for getting around, and you typically have smaller dwellings for each family, you have lower per capita greenhouse gas emissions, which is obviously really important. And there's been a lot of research on this, that in denser communities, people are actually happier. People like being around other people and having the opportunity to interact with other people outside of their home. So having a part of town that facilitates that is a really important part of facilitating just like a happier place to live. And this is even the case, there's a lot of research on this, where this is even the case where people will say they want to live in a place that's less dense, but if you survey people, you actually see that they're happier in a place that is more dense. And the last thing I want to say is, for anyone that's hesitant about this kind of proposal, is to visit a place that has like a vibrant main street in a suburban community. I had the occasion to visit Summit just recently, but Cranford is another example that's pretty close. And if you look at these places, you have these very vibrant, maybe it's only 3 blocks, but it'll be exactly the kind of thing that's being proposed here, with first floor businesses with residents above that for maybe 3 to 5 stories, But if you go 1 or 2 blocks off of these main streets, it looks just like any street in Highland Park off of Route 27, which with mostly detached single-family homes. So I want to make sure that people understand that this is not the kind of thing where we're, let's turn Highland Park into a city. It's not. We want to have this strip where it's denser and it has mixed use, while basically keeping the rest of the town
30
the
seconds.
same use as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Mayor, can I just jump in on that one? Oh, because Dan made a good comment and I want to tell, so I happened to work on Cranford Crossing, in my early careers, 20-something years ago. We went through multiple lawsuits, contaminated property. It was a parking lot owned by the municipality that we put into the marketplace. We went through 3 developers. And I can't tell you how much community, I lived in town at the time, how much community pushback and how people felt so strongly that this was going to be a mistake. Flash forward 20 years later, and at the time it was the people in the north of Cranford didn't want it. They didn't want anything to do with it. It ended up in the south of Cranford. If you flash forward today, South Cranford, south of the railroad tracks, is probably the most vibrant section of the town now. It took 20 years, but it was that parking garage and that Cranford Crossing project that ultimately jumpstart that entire project.
Thank you for that, Joe. Terry, do we have anybody else?
We do. Rosalind Bell, please state your name and address for the record. You need to unmute yourself. You're still muted on your end, not mine.
Okay, I did not raise my hand.
Oh, your hand is raised. I will unraise it for you. All right, and I will remove your permission to speak. All righty. Next up is David Hughes. David, please state your name and address.
Hi, Terry. South 3rd Avenue, David Hughes. Quick factual question about who we imagine would own the parking structure and who would own the land below it. Second, I want to really agree with Dan. I think he put things brilliantly, and I want to make sure that things are moving, in fact, in the direction towards a pedestrian walking-oriented development. I've spoken a couple of times about mid-block crosswalks and how the people who move into this place and use cars less frequently than the average Highland Park resident will want to move around this downtown. We will want them to move around this downtown. And so a mid-block crosswalk between 2nd and 3rd by the development and between 1st and 2nd by the development, I think is absolutely critical. There are a lot of mid-block crosswalks on Route 27. Princeton has them, Edison has them. In fact, New Brunswick has them. If we feel that our car drivers are driving so recklessly that they won't stop for the crosswalk, we can put in a pedestrian-oriented signal or pedestrian-operated signal that turns to yellow as soon as the pedestrian presses it. The critical thing that you mentioned, Joe, about parking, I'm not quite sure if I caught your meaning. So you seem to say we're moving away from the centralized parking deck on North 3rd or coming up with a compromise that would involve some ground level parking in the development on Raritan Avenue. I hope that that does not involve creating curb cuts because that would be very damaging for our downtown. I'd certainly oppose any plan to create new curb cuts, no matter how good it is in other respects. But I'm even a little bit uneasy about the idea of people in this development parking on Raritan Avenue, because one thing that'll make this development attractive to these pedestrian-oriented people is a bus lane, dedicated bus/bike lane on Raritan Avenue in both directions, so that the jitney that you spoke about can actually get quickly to the train station. So we need to, I think in order to attract the sort of people that will live in this place, we need to remove all the parking on Raritan Avenue and replace it with dedicated bus and bike lanes. So I guess I continue to wonder how serious you guys really are about a pedestrian-oriented development, because it's something this town has never seen, and we have not attracted by and large people who want to live a pedestrian-oriented lifestyle. So we really have to think outside the box and think beyond the footprint of this development itself about the whole transportation corridor. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I love the idea of mid-block crosswalks. And we'll have to work with the DOT on that.
Mayor, I think he asked a question about ownership of the garage. I think I saw that in the chat too. So to be determined, right? I've done public sponsored projects with garages in South Orange Village, Bloomfield, Cranford, just to name a few. And they come in many forms. They come in publicly owned, but privately operated. I think in South Orange Village, we actually condoed the garage, and part of it's owned by the private developer and part of it's owned by the town, operated by the parking authority. So there's a lot of creativity that will go into that decision making as it comes time to. I suspect that Highland Park doesn't really want to operate a garage. I'm pretty sure about that. So we'll have to figure all that out. That maybe we don't even want to own it. But that's sort of a to be determined as part of the negotiations. Part of trying to make sure it's cost effective. There's a lot that'll go into that, and there's a lot of creativity under the redevelopment law and how we can structure that. But that is definitely a to be determined item.
Joe, you raised something that was a question that I forgot to ask earlier. Right now, where the parking lot is being considered, it's a big, open, ugly lot with trucks parking there. And there's been no enhancement of that property for decades. If a parking garage were put there and there were improvements to the property, would that be beneficial in terms of taxes for our residents? In other words, ratables?
Well, parking garage is a rateable, probably held for sure. It's an enterprise, it's a commercial enterprise like any other commercial enterprise. So yes, that a privately held owned parking garage is a rateable. So yes. And then I think the other question that I think was asked by Mr. Hughes, I believe, the plan is flexible enough. Our goal is to have a central parking garage. We think that's the best choice. I think that's where we all think this makes sense. But that parking garage is currently slated to be on private property, and that will require cooperation with that property owner. And so we didn't want all of our projects to be captured by our desire for a central parking garage. So we built into the redevelopment plan, the possibility of parking individual tracks on the individual tracks. That could come with curb cuts, which we don't want to have. I think everyone's universal on that concern too. So we're going to have to try and figure out, we're going to try and make the centralized parking work. We don't want to be captured to that solution for all sorts of reasons, including negotiations. But we also want to avoid the curb cuts at the same time. And we want to have a walkable community. There's a lot of things we're going to try and pull together here. For now, this plan will give us the flexibility to do any and all of those things. That's it.
Terry?
Just before we move on, Joe, it's a lawyer question for you. The panel, so attendees are starting to chat us. My sense is if they want that on the record, they should raise their hand and state it. Correct, Joe?
It's better because we're not.
Because I'm finding it a little distracting. It's coming in, and so I didn't want attendees to think that's a substitute for raising hand and stating their point. Because I know it's a complicated area, and Zoom is a new area for public meetings, and I don't know how to deal with that, but I wanted you to guide us on that because I don't want everybody to start chatting us while we're trying to have our public comment.
Yeah, I agree. Let's ask people to just raise their hands. We'll generally ignore the chats in terms of.
Yeah, they pop up. It's only on the panelist side, not to the attendees. So yeah. I don't think that's fair to the public either. So I think it's better to, if you have something you want to ask or state, it would be helpful if you could raise your hand and ask or state it.
Great point.
Good question, Terry.
Thank you. It was mostly for my own sanity while this meeting's going on. Next up is Randy Solomon, or I should say Randall Solomon, as comes up on my screen. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Randy Solomon, 331 Felton Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey. I just want to say a few things. One is I really like the plan. I like the direction that it's headed. I'm excited and hopeful that it happens. I wanted to review some of the history of how we got here, because I think it'll be helpful for people that are trying to evaluate the plan, and especially why we need a parking deck, which I think is one of the linchpins of public support or opposition for this. And so the previous plan, going way back, I forget when it was, but, more than 10 years ago, actually Joe said it, the town went through a very extensive public process to develop a redevelopment plan for the town. We talked about what we wanted. We wanted a better town downtown. We wanted fewer store vacancies, more vibrancy, more shopping opportunities. We wanted a green and walkable community. We wanted to lower taxes by having more tax ratables in the downtown. And so we decided that we needed kind of downtown redevelopment that had, more people living right in the downtown who would patronize the stores, living on top of spaces that could be retail or commercial, and give us better tax ratables. And that plan failed in large part because we didn't have any large enough parcels that developers could buy and build on that could accommodate a building, and also accommodate all the parking that was needed. And we tried. I was the vice chair of the redevelopment agency. We talked to a lot of developers. Highland Park is a challenging town to build in, for them to make a worthwhile, profitable development. And so the parking deck is proposed as a solution to what was really the intractable problem. It enables developers to build buildings at a size and at a scale that they actually want to build, and that will be profitable to them, because if they don't build it, then it's not going to get built. The town is not building these things. The town is not proposing specific buildings. The town is just creating a plan saying, these are the types of things that we would support, that we would allow you to build. So it's up to the developer to decide if they're going to build it or not. And we've got lots of experience that says, without this deck, the development won't happen. So it's not really a choice of, would we like, the perfect buildings and no parking deck? The choice is really, would we like the deck and these buildings, or
30 seconds.
would we like nothing? And then regarding the parking deck also, I just want to note that some people are against it. I've heard David Hughes speak out against it because, and it sounds like he's turning around a little bit, but because in general, Dave is against car storage, right? Building structures for cars. And so, it's moving against our goals for a walkable community. I've seen other people arguing against it because there's insufficient parking in the actual units in the apartment buildings. But I think the deck actually strikes a nice balance between those two approaches and those two objections. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Next person up is David Copperman. David, please state your name and address. David, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, is that all right?
Now you're good.
Thank you. David Copperman, 120 Hill Street. Yes, the central parking garage, I have 2 points on it, please. The first one, Mayor, it's been your assertion that aggregate ownership of cars across all these apartments will not exceed the capacity of the parking deck. That will be a requirement. You stated that in the past. You're adhering to that, I assume.
I'm sorry, David, could you please say that question one more time?
Will the number of cars owned by people in these residents who will be required to park in the central parking deck, will that aggregate ownership be required to not exceed the capacity of the parking deck?
So I'm sticking with what I said in the past. What we've been looking at in terms of the size of the parking deck was assumptions based on how many units we thought each of these buildings would have, and assumptions on the numbers of cars. So I'm going to ask the professionals, either Jim or Joe, if they can explain that a little bit in greater detail, given the number of units that we've been talking about.
Right. Well, the first thing is a piece of important baseline information. Right now, Highland Park has its existing population has a much lower automobile ownership per household than Middlesex County.
Mr. Constantine, I have to object to that. It's a non sequitur. We're talking about specific development in a 2-block area of the central business district. Please
Governor,
stick
just let him
to
finish.
that.
Just let him finish. Just let him finish.
Yeah, yeah, but let the professionals answer your question before you speak again, please.
I'm trying to provide the perspective about how we made, where the assumption comes from. So with a lower automobile ownership in Highland Park, by the way, more than half of the community is a no car or a 1-car household. More than half of Highland Park owns 1 car or less. So with that and what we know about what's happening with urban multifamily households in comparable communities and downtown mixed use settings and where there's transit that's accessible, we felt comfortable and we've been using basically 1 car per unit as a parking ratio for our planning or broad brush planning at this stage.
Okay, so you're not saying then that aggregate ownership of cars amongst these new residents will not be allowed to exceed will be allowed to exceed the capacity of the parking deck, because the assumption is it won't, and if it does, it won't be by much. It's based on assumption.
It's, David, I don't want you to put words in mine or the planner's mouth.
I'm quoting his term.
I think maybe I understand the question because it was a little confusing. I apologize. I think so the redevelopment plan has parking requirements, and it's based upon the number of units, and you have to meet those requirements, and you have to identify how you're going to meet those requirements. And those requirements are going to have to be approved. So if you need 5 cars and they're not parking on site, you have to show us that you're going to park 5 cars in the garage, which I think is, to your question, would be a yes. Right?
Thank you.
That we're gonna, I think what you're looking for is, how are we making sure that they're not gonna park those 5 cars somewhere else? And that's
Right.
through the redevelopment plan. So I think your concern is addressed in the plan.
Okay, so in the plan, it states that these requirements are central to the plan, and it states how they'll be enforced, both ownership and use of the garage for parking to the exclusion of parking elsewhere.
So when you say ownership, it's tied to, as with most zoning, it's the parking requirement is a function of the number of units. There's a formula, and then you have to tell us how you're going to satisfy that formula and where, on site or through the garage. And you have to get all that to happen in order to go your site plan for your site plan approval. So it's not about you're using the word ownership. I'm confused by that. It's by number of units, which could be a rental. It could be an owner. That's all I'm just trying to.
I wouldn't want to narrow it too much. The point being that cars used by residents in these 4 buildings will be required to be parked in the centralized parking deck, which means that the total number of cars cannot exceed the capacity of the parking deck. That being stated, how will both of those things be enforced? The ownership, the rental, the aggregate number of cars used, owned by those residents, and how will it be enforced that they will only park in the central deck?
So
if you don't have that in detail, you're not ready to present this to the planning board, in my opinion, as a 35-year systems engineer.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, but it's what you're describing is impossible to do, right? So you're saying that, say the parking requirement is 1 per unit, and this particular household owns 2. So the landlord has required them to get a parking permit and park 1 in the garage, but that homeowner owns 2 cars. How do we know that? How do we make sure that they don't own they can only own 1 car? Impossible, right? So throughout all the commercial district, the employees everyone may have a second car. You can't prevent someone from owning more than 1 car. You can't, so all we can do then is to they may decide to buy a second car. There's nothing we can really do about that. There's no way to deal with that issue in any development project. You can't prohibit people from buying a second car. You can only say that they're going to, each unit has to buy a space for 1 car based upon what we think people will need for cars. And you limit that numbers. And so that's what we did. But to tell a household that they can't own a second car is impossible.
Terry?
Just the only thing I'd add, and I muted David because I thought his time was up, but if you asked me to put him back, I realized I did that without your permission. We also are looking at the possibility of neighborhood, permit parking, that would help manage some of the impacts on the adjacent neighborhoods. Because I'm not sure if that's where David's concerns were coming from, but that is something we will be exploring if and when our attorney gets me that RFQ that we've been talking about. So I want to make sure if that, I had taken his question a different way, and we are committed to exploring how that would work and if it makes sense. So I just want to make sure that point is clear.
I also want to add that, Joe, once any development plan goes to the planning board, they are the ones who generally address the issues of parking, don't they?
They'll make sure they'll have to, in their application, show compliance with the redevelopment plan and the requirements concerning parking. I'm just saying that if they meet those requirements and the household owns a second car, we can't prevent people from owning more than one car.
Right.
And
But
Joe, you also have,
right.
as Terry described, through regulation, we can impact where they park with their second car.
But they could, if they want to park in Piscataway because they want their second car, we have nothing we can do about
Right.
that. So that there's a limit to our ability to control. We can control some of the negative impacts.
Yeah, I do want to also just iterate what Terry said before about our neighborhood parking plans that we've been looking into for other parts of the community as well. And this does come up every time that there is development going on, and we want to ensure that people who live in a particular neighborhood will be able to find parking in their neighborhoods. And that's part of what the plan that Terry is alluding to in terms of neighborhood parking is all about. Okay, do we have another hand up, Terry?
We do. Next is Carl Prey. Please state your name and address. Please unmute yourself.
Right. Yeah. So
It's Mary Forsberg, not Carl Prey, and
address
317 Dennison Street. I am sort of stunned at this. I am wondering why it is that it took you 4 months to do this plan, since you've changed pretty much nothing about it. I mean, the parking garage is still a major part. Doesn't sound very optional to me. And with all of the things that you're talking about in this plan, what you are doing is you are creating a big concrete canyon on Raritan Avenue and pushing all of the negative things, all the externalities off on the neighboring communities. A parking garage on the Polos property at Raritan, Dennison, and North Third, and the Festival Street, which, as far as I can see, no one likes the idea of the Festival Street, and you have not given up that. I can't imagine what it's going to do to the north side of town. All of those cars will be driving through the north side, and anybody that thinks that they're not going to be affected by that are gonna wonder who thought that idea up, 10 years from now or 15 years from now, if it actually goes into effect. Plus the fact that with the street closures, it's hard to see that the Festival Street and the parking garage are going to be a benefit to my neighborhood at all. I also understand that you're not doing any feasibility studies at all, even though I know that was in the contract for LRK to do an economic feasibility study to look at what the potential impact of these changes are going to be on the community in terms of parking, in terms of traffic, in terms of pedestrian safety, in terms of the economy. I mean, if Highland Park is involved in a parking garage, that's no ratables. There aren't going to be any ratables coming from the parking garage. The majority of parking garages require money from the community in order to keep them going, either through fines on parking meters. Parking meters, I know that parking meters have been discussed. I don't think people in Highland Park want parking meters.
That's how Princeton finances their garage.
That's right. That's how Princeton finances their garage. And frankly,
30 seconds.
all of the places that you talk about, Cranford, how great Cranford is. Carl and I went up to look at Cranford. They have a train station. Highland Park doesn't have a train station. Highland Park doesn't have anything that would really require parking, except the fact that you are building apartment buildings that are larger than they need to be in Highland Park. And what about all of the development over by the railroad tracks? How many houses have gone in there? And what has that done to the ratables?
Thank you, Mary. Terry, do we have another?
We do. Next is Nora Krieger. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Nora Krieger. I live at 19 North 6th Avenue. I laud you for trying to do something. We have so many empty businesses on the avenue that it is not good for the community at all. And we're not the only community being hit by this now that we've had the pandemic. But there were a couple of things that I heard people say in addition to what I wanted to say. First of all, I think the parking for each building is very critical, and I don't know why you cannot make it part of the proposal that would go to the developers that they have to put some parking in there, because I've been in communities where they don't have that, and it brings pollution and congestion, and people are driving around and around and around in circles. We don't have a movie theater here. We don't have other theaters to bring people in here at night. We have the Festival Street is an issue because from the last meeting I went to, I remember that Ballard was talking about she wouldn't have access to where she parks her car for her real estate agency at a number of the businesses along there. I like the idea of establishing a jitney to the train station and back. But of course it has to run on regular hours. You can't depend on any public transportation here. You never know when a bus is coming or anything else. I think that to talk about people giving up their cars in New Jersey is a ridiculous assumption. I also think we're making a lot of assumptions about what's going to happen with the economy and whether people are going to go back to work in office buildings or in other towns or where they're going to be, for which they need to use cars. I think there's going to be a congestion issue with the parking deck. I like the idea, by the way, that you blocked off the parking with some housing that was more in tune with the neighborhood there. But I don't think I think you're going to have a problem if you put the farmer's market on the Festival Street, then you have the parking deck. And I know now I use the farmer's market all the time, but I do drive over there because I can't carry the stuff back. And
30 seconds.
There's not going to be enough parking in there for residents and people using the Festival Street. And if you have all these new apartments, they're not going to have anywhere to park their cars either, even their one cars. Forget about two cars, but the single cars they might come with. And Edison has residential parking only near the train station, which of course cuts you off from parking anywhere for blocks and blocks and blocks. And that's a really big problem. And oh well, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Nora. Did anyone want to address any of the questions that Nora raised?
I don't think I saw, I didn't think I heard a question.
Okay, I was just thinking about the comment you made about access to the parking garage or the movie theater thing. One of the things that does come up very frequently is movie theater. We've been talking about that in Highland Park now since 2003, I think it is. And one of the thoughts that came to mind was part of the parking garage on the first floor. Jim and Joe and Terry, I believe, is supposed to be a community room that could be used for many different things. One of the thoughts might be to be able to have virtually a year-round farmers market, craft market, so that the farmers market / holiday or craft market could move indoors into that public space. Anything more that I'm missing on that particular area regarding Nora's questions?
No, I think that
one thing we had mentioned previously, it's an intent, it's a detail to move next, but part of the parking garage could have reserved public parking on the ground floor, which would be effectively covered parking on farmers market days next to the farmers market. For instance, in Hightstown, there's a redevelopment project moving forward, and there's several dozen public spaces reserved on the ground floor of a private parking garage for the downtown business community use. Part of the potential for a liner space on the ground floor so that you don't see right into the garage from North 3rd Avenue is some sort of a flex space. We've indicated in the plan that we at least envision at this level, it could be perhaps an arts gallery, exhibit and entertainment type space. There are examples of garages that have done that. And there also are examples of garages that have Mayor taken the idea of a year-round market into the garage and basically use the covered garage. And I think that's a dynamic that people ought to think about. The covered garage, covered parking, close to the market, a covered ground floor of the garage that could be used for a more expanded year-round market.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's what I was thinking of. Okay, Terry?
We do have more participants. I need to step away for 2 minutes, but Jennifer's prepared to do the duty of muting, unmuting in my absence, but I apologize. I just need to step away for 1.
Okay, thank you. Then Jennifer, do we have another hand raised?
Yeah, we have Emma B. Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Emma Barker Lasar. I live at 233 Raritan Ave. So I really just wanted to raise my hand and urge everyone involved in, pushing this plan through to please remember disabled residents and even people visiting the town. I live right on the corner of where the Track D is proposed, and I park on 3rd because there is no parking on Raritan at night, and that is the closest vaguely accessible spot for me, and I am concerned about what will happen when and if all car access to that part of the street is taken away. And also, I also would hope that you consider for if that part of the plan does also go through, that not all pavement is accessible to everyone. I had seen in a previous, I'm not sure if it was a council meeting or a redevelopment meeting, discussion of cobblestone or cobblestone-like pavement on that street. And that is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for folks using wheelchairs to navigate. And it's very hard and very dangerous for people with limited mobility to navigate because of fall risks. I understand that redevelopment is a part of town growth and we all want Highland Park to be really great, but I really would like to urge you to keep safety and true accessibility in mind. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for bringing up those cobblestones. Jim, are you raising your hand?
Cobblestones are actually, were never proposed. It would be a smooth pavement stone. And we've also talked about the concept of bringing the sidewalks in the street to the same plane so that actually the accessibility goes up dramatically from what you have today in that location. I should also indicate that the new housing that would be coming in would provide for a huge infusion of accessible housing right along the avenue, where I know that some of the older apartments are not accessible. So I think there's a lot of things indicating. And last point, within the parking structure, generally there are accessible spaces that are put in the prime locations with shortest distance. So I would expect you'd have accessible parking as well for the farmers market that doesn't exist perhaps at all today.
So would those accessible spaces be, would there be enough to accommodate people who not only live in the building, but also current residents whose parking would be taken away?
I think that could be accommodated in final planning. I mean, one of the strategies I think we have, and I know the mayor has talked about this, is for us to go and try to find people that are parking in on street or in scattered locations and see if they can be additional, quote, customers for the structured parking so that we can keep everyone's cars in that location and try to increase the revenue and the economics of the garage.
Okay. I mean, I don't think that paying for parking here is something that I'm really interested in. I don't think I should have to pay to park, close to my home in Highland Park.
Okay, thank you. I just want to let Stephanie know, thank you very much for joining us. Please enjoy your family holiday.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Okay, Terry, do we have another?
We do. And Jennifer, thank you for filling in for a moment for me. I apologize to Emma for missing the beginning of her remarks. The next person up is phone number 4445, last four digits, who I suspect I know who it is, but I will let her state her name and address for the record.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, Lois Lebbing here. Hi, North 2nd Avenue. Okay, history. This is not the first time Highland Park Borough was the redeveloper. Look back to the 1950s, especially when you look at the deed restriction for the garages at the Highland Montgomery that you're possibility of condemning. Okay, my first comment was going to be in the 60s. We were blessed with the lovely Parktown house down there, way down the hill toward the river. The two apartment complex there set a precedent. We know that for height, although it sits very low compared to what is planned. And if you're copying the height, why not also copy the Parktown house tenant parking that's covered below the building? And yes, it's only on the one River Road side for the tenants, but the other building, if you look at the Adelaide Avenue side, that building also has a huge garage door where the apartments keep the equipment, maintenance equipment, storage, and supplies. So it's doable. And if I am thinking correctly, Tract A has a side street called North 2nd and Denison. Tract B is right near 2nd with Sunoco on the corner. C has Magnolia behind, and D you know about. Okay, second one, you also received a nice letter from Pastor Seth quite a while ago from the Reformed Church stating that he wouldn't mind seeing a 1 or 2 story parking deck below the planned apartments at the current farm market location, which would help the parish's hundreds and hundreds of participants. Why not plan like they did in the 1960s and place parking under each new apartment building? And so this plan has been in the public, this discussion, not plan, since less than a year, since about October, it's been brought to us. Now, I was reading the mayor and others on the council have certainly been involved since at least 2014, when the mayor was a councilwoman, not even a mayor. And we're all glad it's nearly over. Improvement would be wonderful. But is it fair for homeowners near Tract A, me, to be badgered with many, many phone calls we've gotten to buy this house? This past November brought a gift in the mail with the postage was nearly $5 from a Metuchen Remax realtor. Very, very strange. But why? Who put her up to that? Another surprise I just found out a week ago reading minutes at Borough Hall, the planning board. Your realtor, who was interested in our property, is on your planning board as a new member on your planning board. Now, that beats a little gift of textile, beats the culprit who put our house on the market for rent maybe 10 years ago.
It sounds like time. Was that time, Jen?
Yes.
That's what I heard.
Okay.
I wanted to finish, but there'll be other times.
Thank you, Lois.
Next up, we have Laurel Cornfeld. And before I unmute her, I just want you to know, Mayor, we have about 11 hands, including Laurel, remaining.
And when are we scheduled?
You had stated 9 p.m. So.
Okay. All right, so let's get to the as many people as we can.
Okay. Laurel, state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Laurel Cornfeld, 106 North 6th Avenue. First, I want to say I'm deeply disappointed that the chat that was going on between attendees and panelists has just been disabled for no clear reason, because I think that's important to continue the dialogue.
Can I step in, Mayor, on that one? I did that because we don't usually have chat open by our own policies. I wasn't aware it was open, and based on our conversation with the attorney earlier, I thought it was inappropriate to do that. I apologize if I overstepped by turning that off, but we have not allowed that at any of our prior meetings before. So that's why I did so.
And it has a lot to do with open public records and public meetings.
Right. So I did that because in no previous meeting has that feature been enabled. I'm not sure why it was tonight.
I think it should be considered.
But I don't want you to use up your time on that, Laurel.
Okay, one question is, I know the borough purchased the property, the auto-related property next to Breeze, closer to New Brunswick. Is that in the redevelopment plan? And is there contamination on that site? Because if the borough purchased it, we become responsible for cleaning it up.
Okay, so who wants to answer that question, Terry, or?
I mean, I won't speak to the liability question, I'll let Joe, but we did purchase the Bergenardo 101 Raritan property, but Joe, maybe you could speak.
Yeah,
to
and
it.
then we did have a grant to review, right, and do due diligence on it.
Right.
Yes.
And what's the finding?
Clean. It's okay.
Completely? Okay. I did want to comment. I think that I want to dissent with a previous speaker who said that this plan with the deck specifically will reduce greenhouse gases, contributing to climate change, because I think what we could end up with is more traffic congestion, which could do the exact opposite. I question having a theater on the lowest level of a parking garage because you've got a lot of exhaust and emissions there. Is that really the best place to put it? Also, a lot of people, instead of going to malls, they shop online. That means that there will probably be a lot of Amazon and other trucks making deliveries to these residences. And I think these all should be considered because that, there's idling and that also adds to pollution. And finally, I just want to say I oppose any and all paid parking in Highland Park, including for apartment residents. I think in a time of pandemic, when people are struggling, to ask them to pay for parking, including via permits or paid parking meters, or even asking people in the apartments to pay an amount is unfair and kind of, I guess, a little out of touch. Most people are really struggling right now.
Thank you, Laurel. Do we have another hand?
We do. Next up comes up as Sasha. Please state your full name and address for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Sasha Rudy, 247 Cleveland Avenue, Highland Park. I wanted to comment on what Dan said earlier and give insight to the type of person possibly looking to buy or rent one of the new units. I actually live by the train tracks. I moved here from Texas in October. I'm one half of a childless couple in their early 40s with one car. The town I lived in was 13 square miles and had 3,500 people. They protected this density fiercely, so this was quite a leap for me. When I decided to move to New Jersey, I was looking for a handful of things. I wanted proximity to a train station. I wanted a safe, walkable town where I could run errands on foot as I don't drive. And yet I also didn't want to be in New York. You know, that's a big leap for me. When I first got here, there was a buying frenzy on homes. What I saw was an aging selection of homes that, while beautiful, needed work done. Buyers were waiving inspections and appraisals, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. So I bought a brand new condo. I didn't realize how contentious heritage at Highland Park was until I joined the Facebook group. I imagine there's a lot of young professionals that absolutely want to live in a town like this, but maybe have newer stock of housing that requires less maintenance or less hoops than the huge attorney process for buying a home that I learned about. So I know that people want to protect the town, but I also think that it needs to grow and evolve too. So put my hand on.
Thank you, Sasha.
Welcome to Highland Park. I always tell someone new I need from Highland Park. Claudia Farber, you're up next. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, it's actually Don Stern. I'm on Claudia's computer, so.
No sweat. Don Stern, you said?
Yes, Don Stern, 317 Summit Place, Highland Park. I just was wondering to what extent provisions are being made that development on these various buildings use green materials and be fitted to be energy efficient, perhaps have solar panels on their roofs, and be the kind of new construction that we are all going to need to see more of. So if anybody can tell me if there have been provisions made in this direction.
So Jim, is that you?
Yeah, we have both provisions in the plan for green infrastructure and green building. So there is an intent to try to see elements of green building incorporated into this.
Okay, can you give me any more detail on that?
I think the specifics of that will really come when we get some proposals back in, but we outline it in section 5.7.12, sustainable design.
Okay, I will take a look at that.
Take a look at the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Next person on the list, Mayor, and it is 8:44, just for the record, and we have 10 hands. Jonathan Lerner. Please state your name and address for the record. Hello? Jonathan? Hello?
Terry, let's move on to the next person, and if Jonathan is going to be able to speak later, he can raise his hand again.
Okay, Mayor, I see someone who's spoken previously. Would you like me to come back to that person? Or,
yeah, let new people first.
Okay, so next up, Harold Sacherwitz. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi,
hello.
It's Marion Sacherwitz at this moment.
Hi.
Okay, I have major reservations about the density of the project. But what I'm asking at the moment is we're taking away parking spaces that are currently available on North 3rd, and we're taking away parking spaces that are currently available on the Farmers Market site. So my concern, among other things, is that we're planning to increase the activity on the avenue, and yet we're taking away spaces that now are used by shoppers and other people who come to Highland Park. How is that being addressed? I mean, it seems to me that everything, the garage is not going to be too big, and yet it's going to accommodate all the additional housing, and it's going to accommodate all the additional shoppers. I don't know. I think we might be creating problems for ourselves in terms of parking.
Okay, Joe, do you want to address the amount of spaces in the parking lot, or Jim, or any comments on that?
Jim, do you know?
The plan accommodates and recognizes that there is a surface parking lot within the block of Track C between the Reformed Church where the farmers market is held today. So that's recognized. I think the size and configuration of that is something that needs to come out of the next level of response that we get and look at there.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Next person.
Hold on one second. Sorry about that, Mayor. Next up is Jennifer Chapman. State
Hello.
your name and address.
Yeah, it's actually Robert Slevich.
These spouses and couples. Hi there.
123 Magnolia Street. First, I want to make a comment that I'm very bothered by the garage as it's been depicted over and over again. One of the things I see is that, that parking garage and the public space underneath is going to be visible from Dennison Street, North 3rd Street, and from Raritan Avenue. And I don't like the facade of it. If it's going to be visible and that facade is visible, if it's not going to be good enough to be put on Raritan Avenue, then that facade shouldn't be on North 3rd Avenue either. I don't understand why you would entertain any sort of development that does not have the like a frontage building or some sort of other building in front of it with mixed uses that were fronting North 3rd Avenue, particularly if you want to try to entertain some sort of festival street. I don't like the idea of the festival street. I think we have a great site already at the farmers market that is already like our town square. So I don't know that we need to have a festival street, but that festival street is going to be doomed to failure if you're only looking at the side of a parking garage and a side of a Provident bank. I did have two questions. One was, why didn't the plan address some of the other vacant lots that are already on the avenue that have been addressed over and over again, but nothing has happened? The Sunoco lot and the BB Big lot, which are right next to each other. And then the other one, how does this plan address the timing of the developments? If all the parking for Lot A and Lot B and Lot C are supposed to go over into that parking garage, but that parking garage is developed last, then where does the parking go in the interim? Or is this all hinging on the idea that Lot D is developed first?
Okay, there were a few questions in there.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it.
Okay.
So you sort of described the chicken and the egg challenge that we're faced with, which is why we've developed a plan to be flexible in terms of if we, it does allow for a project that's not going to have a garage. So, and at the same time, we have begun to give some thought to interim parking alternatives. I don't think we have settled on any, but for example, we own property as was described earlier, and we will own some more property. So there may be a need to find interim solutions to the garage, but that sort of is key to one of the challenges that's being faced through this process, which is how to make a central garage happening, and while other projects that may be coming at the same time or maybe even before, but are going to rely on that garage, how do you make that all work? So it's something that's front and center of the challenge facing us as we move forward. I forget what his other question was.
The other properties.
Oh, okay. So we selected these properties. I know we've said this, over the course of the 9 months, but we've selected properties that we own, where we own the land or will soon own the land, so we control the destiny of that property. So that's easy to move forward. We wanted to pick properties that we think we could succeed at. And then we selected the 2 other parcels where there's property owners that are ready, willing, and able to develop their own property. The other parcels you mentioned, we haven't gotten necessarily that same feedback from the property owners. We're absolutely expect that as we go through this process, more property owners will come to us and say, hey, what about us? Including perhaps the gas station you described. And that'll be awesome. We'll jump on that opportunity as it comes. But we wanted to pick something that was not too overwhelming. So not have 7 or 8 or 9 locations. It becomes, if you're not careful about picking bite-sized pieces, you sort of can never get moving. So we strategically picked 4, 2 that we control, 2 where we had property owners that were willing to work with us. But that doesn't mean that all these other parcels you described won't become available. The property owners won't contact us, and we won't go through the same process and expand this over time.
Okay, Terry?
I just, to build on what Joe said, because I know I've gotten this question from property owners in the neighborhood. This is the beginning of the conversation with them, and especially what Jim alluded to previously. You know, we would like to know who else might be interested in developing and utilizing that centralized structure, specifically those in the more adjacent areas. And we could easily, and we've discussed this before, envision a second plan emerging that might pull together some of those properties that would play with this plan as well. But again, to Joe's point, we've been criticized for being too big, and we've been criticized for being too small, you know. So we tried to establish what we could achieve, because I would point out that the previous redevelopment plan took on a lot of property, and we didn't make enough headway. So that's part of what the lesson learned that we were applying when we were designing this plan. So,
okay.
Thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
Thank you. Next person.
It's Andrea Alexander. Please state your name and address for the record.
It's Jeff Perlman, another spouse.
I should just go with the spouse name first now. All right.
116 North 3rd Avenue. And, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about parking and the provision of parking. I think a centralized parking vision with a pedestrian, you know, with a festival plaza, I think creates a pedestrian precinct as much as it creates a parking precinct. And the impact of pedestrian impacts emanate from that destination. I think there's an opportunity to reimagine the streets surrounding the parking garage on the north side, but also as it crosses Raritan Avenue, to calm those streets, right? Because people will be walking to their car from various residential developments and also driving away from there. The opportunity to calm those streets, to pedestrianize them, to bring speed limits down, design speed limits down to 20 miles per hour, opposed to 25. I think there's an opportunity to do that. And, you know, we have a pedestrian and bicycle plan. Didn't even, I think, envision a parking garage. But I think now with that parking garage, centralized parking garage as a receptacle, sort of an absorbent of the part, you know, demand, so these parcels can be unlocked and redeveloped. I think we have an opportunity to really pedestrianize these streets, make them really safe for all ages. And I'm wondering if in an RFQ, even though it's outside the boundaries, to certainly ask developers how they might envision those streets. And then also take it upon ourselves to use the recommendations in the bicycle pedestrian plan and start implementing it now, before the parking garage, before the redevelopment, so that we already have good pedestrian streets in place before the rest of the development comes through. I would just leave it at that.
Some good suggestions. Thank you, Jeff.
Next up, Scott Sussman. State your name and address, please.
113 North 3rd Avenue. You know, I agree with one of the earlier callers that I didn't see like a lot of changes in the plan. I feel that on building on Denison, by the parking deck that would be a, you know, a lot of our street doesn't have driveways. And as, you know, Joe said earlier, there's certainly no way to monitor whether someone would have more than one car. And if people are parked over there, we're going to lose all this parking. And I don't think that that is reasonable in any way. On the January call, Terry mentioned, let me see if I can find it, bringing in a consultant to look at parking. And it seems like many of the questions are dealing with parking and just no answers because we don't have a consultant on parking. You know, this is a huge problem. I think this is the foot traffic and driving traffic will not make our street safe. Actually, will make our street unsafe because people will be just driving around in squares trying to look for parking. So I think that is a huge problem. I also think that, lastly, you know, there have been a few times tonight that we've spoken about comparing us to other towns. And I think it would be really advisable if we didn't compare ourselves to any town that has a train station. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Hey, next person.
Next person on the list is Monica Day, and by my clock, we've got 3 minutes till 9, Mayor.
And how many people do we?
1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, I can give 6, including the next.
All right. So is the council entity, redevelopment entity, willing to stay till 9:15? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so we'll go till 9:15. Let's get as many people in as we can and stick to the 3-minute rule. Go ahead.
All right, Monica Day, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Monica Day, 427 Cedar Avenue, Highland Park. Like a lot of the other speakers, I have questions about the parking. I think that really the quality of life for many people in Highland Park would be in this area would be degraded by having to fight even harder for parking. And also related to that, I question the assertion about the expectation of how many cars in families in these units would own. And there was also an assertion that Highland Park has a lower than average vehicle ownership. I would like to see that broken down by age. There are many senior citizens in Highland Park that do not own cars and do not drive. Is the car ownership in Highland Park for the demographic that you expect in these apartment buildings going to be similar to the demographic of the auto ownership by demographic of Highland Park residents? Thank you.
Jim, when you were talking to us about the car ownership, did it break down anything by apartments or age or anything like that?
It did not.
But go ahead.
Yeah, but certainly the millennial generation car ownership across the nation, not just in Middlesex County, is lower.
Right.
It's mega trend.
And it's interesting also the two demographic age segments in Highland Park that seem to be growing at the fastest pace are both the baby boomers and the millennials. So it would, you know, those two segments are the ones that are looking for walkable downtown communities. Okay, next speaker.
Next person I see comes up as Debbie. Could you state your full name and address for the record, please?
My name is Debbie Patrisco. I live at 113 North 3rd Ave. And I just have 2 comments more procedural. When you mention, oh, we got an email from so-and-so, I feel that all those emails should be posted so that everyone understands the information that is out there. I feel sometimes this is like too siloed, maybe. Some people have an answer to something. Other people might have a worry or a question that has already been answered. So I feel there should be some stakeholder comments posted, or all the emails to the town should be posted, so it's more transparent.
Debbie, just real quick, I'd like to mention, we did create a frequently asked questions document, which is on our website, that was influenced heavily by the types of, kind of like a kind of a cast of all the questions that we have gotten. So if you haven't seen that, I would take a look at that. I do think it does a pretty good job of synthesizing some of the typical questions we got. I'd have to defer to the attorney on the appropriateness of sharing all communications we receive by private individuals.
Yeah, we
publicly.
don't generally like post every email that comes into the borough, and I don't think any public body does. And these are not emails that we're responding to. We're just gathering information. So it's just people giving comments, just like people are doing here.
I raise a good point about the frequently asked questions. The reason we did put that together was just to exactly what you were talking about, basically to share information that we've been giving out based on questions that we are receiving. So I do suggest you take a look at that.
I did, but I just felt that it would be more transparent if it were the emails. Then my second point is,
I have to ask before you go on, did we exceed the 3 minutes yet?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There was some comment tonight about the historic aspect of the redevelopment agency. Then it was dissolved. Now council has that ability. It seems like council did this, but without having the agency, which was made up of community members. Now community members somewhat feel that their voice is lost in this, that maybe in hindsight, there should have been some hybrid process. That if when you had the agency and you were not happy with that, then you moved that to the council, but council moved this so swiftly that the community is at odds, lost, questions. Maybe there should have been a hybrid model where the community could have had more input before it got to this point where you pass this and now it goes to the planning board. So I just, that may be in hindsight. And then my third point is about the parking deck. It's just such a big, almost permanent step that this community will take. Although I do hate comparisons to Cranford, or Somerville, because we do not have a train station. I do think of New Brunswick, Wolfson deck came down, the deck across from the train station came down, that this is a big step to put up a concrete monstrosity. And then 5 years, 8 years, do we need it? And these apartments or whatever that's going to be built are very different demographics, millennials or baby boomers that are empty nesters. I don't see, thank you.
Mayor, if I could just jump in, I think
Yes, sure.
it's so unfair to not suggest that this hasn't been an extraordinary amount of input from the public and the community. I mean, 7 or 9 months, it's almost unprecedented the amount of input from the community that's been going on here. So to suggest that that's not happening is just not right. It's not fair. And I had to speak up because you've had an incredible amount of community input to this process. Incredible. And if you had an agency, it would be no different. So sorry.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, Joe. Okay, next question.
Next hand belongs to Steve Hambro. Please state your name and address for the record.
Stephen Hambro, Grant Avenue. I'm going to piggyback on some of the previous comments in terms of the process to some extent. I represent 2 property owners who are adjoining Track D. We did have a meeting in December, early December, with Mr. Constantine Terry and Matt Hale. And it was expressed at that point in time One of those property owners would like to be involved in the process and like to be involved in the redevelopment. And there was some follow-up on our end. It was acknowledged and stated, we're going to meet with you, but then nothing happened and they're not included. This is a major property on Raritan Avenue, vacant lot next to the Blue Horse Cafe, in between the Chinese restaurant and the Blue Horse Cafe, where it was certainly expressed that that property owner wanted to be involved and wanted to explore it, and nothing happened despite several months of requesting involvement. So there may have been public input, but there has not been amendment to the plan. And it goes back to some of the previous questions and comments as well from Mr. Baumann in terms of, this seems to me like the plan was, this is what it is. We're really not going to change it very much. We're going to hear you, and listen to you, to what you have to say, but we're really not going to change the plan because there has not been amendment to the plan, frankly. I have another property owner who I represent who expressed consternation about the Festival Street and the closure of the entire North 3rd Avenue, who had already gone through the redevelopment process back in 2005, spent a ton of money and successfully redeveloped the property. And now that's the Park Eye Center Parikh building. And now the street is going to be closed down, preventing access for many of his patients and clients. So I'm not quite sure that I agree with those comments about amenability of the plan, certainly, and the process being transparent. So if somebody could address that, I'd appreciate that. And also to address
30 seconds.
the amendment, because now we're going to the planning board. It seems it's a fait accompli, it's done. And the only way that this is going to change is if there's another redevelopment plan. So that seems to be a big process to go through when there's opportunity to have amendments to the plan, which might be beneficial to the community.
So I think
I think Joe spoke earlier to the page that outlines some of the changes to the plan when this was first brought up earlier in the evening. As Joe, I don't remember the section that you were referring people to.
Yeah, I think I remember what I said was, people were looking for black line copies of the old plan to the new plan. That doesn't exist because this is our first draft. So there has been a lot of changes to the vision and the plan in terms of how it was visually described and depicted and to where we ended up. So, but this is the first time you'll see the plan. So no, there hasn't been changes to it. But to Mr. Hembrough's specific question, he is not foreclosed from participating in redevelopment in Highland Park at all. We welcome if his property is, I think it's in a redevelopment area, certainly in a rehab area. There'll be opportunities to expand the plan to do other parcels. There may be standalone plans. There may be another plan that picks a bunch of sites. It's best to just sort of pick what you can and go with it. And then that doesn't foreclose the next project that comes along. If he has an idea for his property, he should be with us right away. We might be able to do a plan just for his property. We've done that before where we just have plans for a single piece of property. It's done all the time, River Road. So if he has a vision for his plan, he should, we'll take the time, we'll meet with him, find out what he'd like to do on the property, figure it out, and it could be its own standalone, plan. There's just a lot of opportunities. So we want people to, don't think that because we picked 4 and we're working hard on 4 doesn't mean that the other people that have visions for their property and real plans for their property, their vacant lot, for example, that they want to do, they should meet with us and we'll move that process forward. That again, what we're doing here does not foreclose that. And I struggle with this concept that we're not being transparent. It's just not fair. And for people to say that when we have 9 months of meetings, we've revealed the plan today. There has to be a first time to reveal it. Okay, that's today. There's a month to think about it. The planning board is a pretty independent body in Highland Park. They're going to listen to your comments. They'll probably give us some comments back, inevitably, and then we'll have to digest those, and then we'll move from there. So this is not a fait accompli. I'm sure the planning board would object to that characterization, knowing them as I do. they will take this as seriously as the public is, and they're going to see it and have some time to review it. And I'd be surprised if they don't have comments for us, frankly. So it's not fair to call it not transparent. It's transparent. It's not fair to say it's not community involvement. There's tons of it. And it's also not fair to call it fait accompli.
Thank you, Joe. Next speaker.
Well, it's coming up Marion Sacherwitz. However, last time it came up Harold, so I guess we'll see if it's a flip. Please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, this time it is.
Okay, stop. Are there any hands raised that have not spoken?
Yes, I see, Mayor, that Jonathan Lerner is trying again. That was the one we had trouble with. So,
okay.
Jonathan, could you please state your name and address for the record? I hope this time.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Great.
Okay. Okay. My name is Jonathan Lerner. I live at 228 Magnolia Street, and I hate to beat the dead horse of the parking issue, but there seem to be so many questions as it relates to parking, and I don't understand how we can be submitting a plan to the planning board when so many uncertainties and there are so many unknowns. The uncertainty of lot ownership is a huge issue. That, you know, how do you put out a plan without having an understanding of who's going to be owning this lot? At one of the track meetings that I went to when you were having those, it was discussed that there would be a requirement that the renters in these apartments use the lot and not park on the street. Has that been addressed, and is that part of the plan? Tonight, somebody addressed the neighborhood lot stickering, and the administrator, Ms. Hovera, said that you're committed to exploring that issue. And I don't understand how you could be submitting a plan with all these things. You know, we're committed to exploring uncertainty of lot ownership. You know, are people required to park? You know, are these tenants going to be required to not park on public streets? You know, as it is today. And I don't understand how a plan can be put forward. And I don't think it's fair to the residents in the area that are going to have to live with this change in their neighborhood. You know, not knowing what these plans are, and how a plan can be put together, with all these uncertainties.
Let me so I think the problem is the use of the word plan, right? The redevelopment law calls this a redevelopment plan. We have no choice about that. That's why we call it a redevelopment plan. But this is a zoning ordinance. So if we were calling it a zoning ordinance all this time, maybe it would make more sense to folks, because they know what a zoning ordinance looks like. They know that a zoning ordinance is regardless of who owns the land. Right, they know the zoning ordinance doesn't accommodate a specific project. It just accommodates bulk standards. So while it's called a redevelopment plan, it's a zoning ordinance effectively, but it comes with all these other benefits that we've described. So I think if people are thinking of it as a plan, meaning I plan to build this specific building on this specific lot, it's going to have these number of units, it's going to look like this. That's not what this is. It's a redevelopment plan because the law requires it, but it's a zoning ordinance. So think of it like a zoning ordinance, and think of how the zoning for the downtown, forget about the plan. What's the zoning today? It's not dependent on who owns the land. It's not dependent on, it's an outline of the bulk standards associated with each lot. So I think if people don't sort of think of the plan the way I think of it and everyone else does, which is much more than a zoning ordinance, and it is in some ways, it's equivalent of a zoning ordinance, which again doesn't really account for specific projects or specific ownership. And then on the parking, people don't have a chance to read it, but they'll see that it does describe how much parking you have to have and how the parking would have to be accommodated. And through the redevelopment agreement, we'll tie down those items. So that was the only thing I would just want to jump in. It's called a redevelopment plan. We have to call it a redevelopment plan, but probably think of it more like a zoning ordinance.
Yeah, well, I hate to disagree, or with that characterization. I don't think the zoning board would grant ordinances so dramatic without knowing answers to all these questions. And I don't know if those questions are answered in the plan. That hasn't been addressed, but there's just so many questions about the parking. I don't understand how there could be a plan put together without answers to those questions.
Well, read when you get a chance to read the plan, then maybe we'll see if you agree or disagree.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Um,
Given that we're at 9:15, I think it's time for us to end the open public session. I think there was a lot, I'm sorry, Matt.
I mean, I'm seeing just a few more hands. People have been waiting. I mean, I'd be open to.
Two more hands, if we could
I'm
maybe.
sorry, how many more hands are there? Two?
Two.
Okay, fine, then let's continue with the two, but that's it. Thank you
All
for
right.
telling me how many hands were still there.
And I'm going to give Marion Sacherwitz another chance. Hopefully you've addressed whatever was causing that feedback. Please state your name and address for the record.
Harold Sacherwitz, 617 South Fifth Avenue. That work?
That did, thank you.
Okay, so I have a question that was sort of floated around and never answered about the parking. Early on, many meetings ago, it was implied that the new residents in the new buildings would not be permitted to park, at least very long, on the borough streets. That if they wanted to park, they would have to go to the deck. Is that still true?
The plan accommodates but on-site parking or a deck, and we do have to.
How would it be enforced?
Sorry?
Okay, so
I think I heard the attorney speaking.
There's
Can you
no,
let him
there's two people trying to speak from
Well,
the
I can't
Sacherwitz
have that.
household.
Harold, if you're speaking, please continue speaking and allow the borough attorney, the redevelopment attorney to answer your question.
okay, I thought he was answering it, but
He was trying to, but somebody else was talking.
okay, so it wasn't me.
So
Okay, then I'm telling everyone to please stop talking while someone is speaking.
The plan provides for parking to be accommodated either on the particular tract or in the garage. And as has been discussed here, and Terry is accurate, we're going to be engaging a parking consultant to talk to us about how to regulate parking so that the issue that you described doesn't occur. And as Terry described, that's it's on my plate to make sure that the scope of services is crafted and sent out. So to the extent that it's happening, it hasn't happened quite yet. That's me. That's me to blame. But it will
So it
happen
might be,
in due course.
so it might be something like all the other residents currently in town would have to have a parking permit. And so then anybody without a parking permit would not be allowed to park there. Is that the idea?
I mean, there's people that literally all they do is this.
Yeah,
know,
okay.
And we got to get those people involved. Is the best way to do it.
And the reason I said we're exploring, I wasn't just trying to be evasive. I'm also, I also, we know that there are neighbors there, some, because we've talked about this in other neighborhoods where there wasn't uniform embrace of on-street permit parking. So we want to have the conversation so that everybody knows what would be involved, but we need the counsel of a professional who lives and breathes this type of thing, and they can present kind of the framework that we need to look at. You know, would it cost money? I don't know. You know, how would we rate? How would we enforce it? I don't know. Those are all things we need those inputs with the support of a professional. So we intend to do that.
I mean, it goes beyond what we're doing here too. Like if you're an employee of one of the stores, you can park in front of the store, I think all day long. And now a customer can't park there, and that's not a great use of that parking space. So there's a lot to be thought about through this process, not just forget about these projects. That's an issue that we need to tackle.
Additionally, from the retailer's perspective, from 2nd Avenue and South, there are people who actually, from our town and from other towns, who actually come and park their cars on Raritan Avenue all day long, and then walk across the bridge to take the train. And people who want to shop in the stores, the store owners are complaining to us, they can't have their shoppers park in front of their stores because you've got all day people parking in front of some of the retail stores so that they can, for free, take the train over in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
so there are a lot of things.
Yeah, regulating parking is not about generating money.
Right.
It's about making sure that the right people get the benefit of the parking to encourage the downtown's success.
Correct.
So, you know, not a commuter in New Brunswick, a patron in the Dunkin' Donuts. That's what we're trying to get to.
Okay.
I'd also like to point out that people who like walking and biking do own cars. Okay, liking to walk and bike doesn't mean you don't have a car. So I guess when it comes down to it, I'm going to really be very interested in how you estimate how many parking spaces are going to be needed. Because that deck, if this plan goes through, that deck is key.
30 seconds.
That better be right. Okay, your estimates better be right.
Jim, if you could send the link to the study on parking and Highland Park and those numbers to Terry, we could include it so people can actually see the study we do talk about.
I mean, they have stuff like margin of error and things like that in it.
Mayor, which study? I'm sorry, I'm not sure which one you're referring
It
to.
was talking earlier about a car study, a study of car ownership.
That's census data.
That's census data.
Okay,
That's
so
in
if
the
you,
2019 master plan already.
okay, so if you, let's make that available to people so they can see that.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Last but not least, Dan Stern Cardinal, or maybe it's Abby, I don't know. Hello, state your name and address for the record.
It's me. Sorry to disappoint you. So Dan Stern Cardinal, Harper Street. And first, thank you for staying late. I really appreciate it. I have 4, I promise, very quick things to say. First is that in terms of we can't develop because we don't have a train station, the New Brunswick train station is walkable from Highland Park. I know a lot of people that either commute on foot or on bike into Rutgers for work, or they go to the train station. As the mayor just said, people park here and walk to the train station as just a regular thing they do. If it wasn't walkable, that wouldn't be the case. So like we have a train station, it's in New Brunswick. At the other end of town, there's Edison train station right there. We are smushed between 2 very close train stations. Second thing, being a resident doesn't give you veto power over the demographics that move into your neighborhood. We've heard a bunch of people say like, oh, well, you know, do we really want millennials moving in? You don't get to like limit who gets to move here based on like what age group they're in. Like that's just super exclusionary and that has no place in like a discussion about development. Third thing, and possibly the most important, on-site parking minimums are bad and there shouldn't be on-site parking minimums. Required parking is wasted space. It makes development harder because you're taking space that could be used for residents or retail and making it worthless. It mostly just sits empty, or it gets taken up by someone who is going to walk to the train station in New Brunswick. Designing for cars is a choice. It's not a requirement. We've been designing for cars in New Jersey decade after decade, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose to design the town differently if we want to. You show people what kind of development they want, and it's actually illegal to build that kind of development in most places because of parking minimums. But the stuff people like doesn't involve lots of off-street on-site parking. It's different from that. And then the last thing, as I've said before, stasis is not an option. The choices are to develop in some way or for the downtown to continue to wither. And just speaking personally, instead of everyone kind of throwing up their hands and saying, well, we don't know how the parking would work, we don't have a train station, I really appreciate that the redevelopment entity is trying to figure this out and come up with plans that are really workable. We can have a vibrant, walkable downtown if we decide to do it. If we decide it's too much trouble because we might lose a street for driving or we might have a parking deck, then we're going to be having the same conversation 15 years from now. And the only difference is going to be that there are going to be more vacant storefronts along Raritan Avenue, but nothing will have changed. So thank you all for all the effort you're putting in. Oh, and one last thing, I do want to note here that all of the members of the redevelopment entity are also residents. So when we're talking about, you know, what residents don't want, like, all of you here are residents as well. So that has to count for something too. So with that, thank you all for staying late. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
I swear I live right around the corner from Dan, so I am a community member too. I think we are.
All right. Well, I want to thank the public for staying with us throughout the evening. I want to thank the council's redevelopment entity and our professionals for, again, for all the work that you've been doing on this. As I said in the very beginning, we need to do this not only for us, but for the children of Highland Park and their children in the future. Thank you all. Have a very good night.
We have to adjourn.
May have a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.